We live in a time of global transformation. The Energy Futures podcast explores how we can accelerate the expansion of clean energy technologies and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. From heating and cooling our homes to moving around our planet and beyond, we bring together researchers, scientists, business leaders and communicators to exchange knowledge and try to answer one important question. How can we create a sustainable energy future for all? This podcast is produced by Energy Futures Lab of Imperial College London.
In today's episode, we're joined by Juliette Sanders, Chief Communications Officer at Energy UK. We'll explore the challenges and opportunities for the UK's energy sector, Energy UK's role in achieving net zero, and the importance of diversity and inclusion through initiatives like Tide. Plus, we'll find out about Juliette's alter ego and her creative public engagement as Killah Jules. I kind of want to start with the last few weeks. It's been a very, very busy weeks for you, especially with the Energy UK, the UK Energy Bill passing. What are your thoughts on that?
It's been a bumper few weeks. I mean, before that, obviously, we were in a pre-election period, and it was quite not difficult for us then, but we have to be so apolitical. We have to be a bit sort of careful about what we're doing. And in a strange way, the sort of energy world went a bit quiet for a while. Now we've got this new government in, they've got huge ambitions, they've really hit the ground running. 72 hours in, they were talking about planning. As you said, we've already got the energy bill, we've got, Great British Energy that's been announced, they've upturned the onshore wind ban. So yeah, it's been a busy few weeks for sure, but really exciting actually. I really feel like there's a lot of momentum behind, what we can get done.
I agree. I think I might go to doom and gloom first. It always seems right to start. We'll bring it low and then we'll bring it high.
And then we'll go high, yeah.
So what are they are a very ambitious government, but what are the key challenges that we're facing right now?
Building as quick as we can, essentially, and making sure that we're making bills affordable. And I think they're the sort of two elements that we need to crack. As I said, they've already announced a lot of things on the planning side of things. That before was a big blocker in the energy system and just getting things built. The planning institutions weren't very well resourced. It can take 10 years to build a wind farm, and actually the construction side of that is just a couple of years, and actually you have to go through reams and reams of planning applications and things like that where they can just be blocked quite easily within the system. So planning is one, grid is another one, and then making sure that we're really looking after the most vulnerable in society. So energy is an essential service, everybody needs it. There are really quick ways that bills can be brought down in terms of where the policy costs sit on bills. There are longer term ways in terms of, increasing our renewables capacity, because renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. So eventually that will trickle down onto bills, but making sure that really those that need the electricity in the meantime and the energy in the meantime are supported. So, they've got big challenges ahead. And as I said, as you build more infrastructure, that is going to mean a little bit of disruption in communities. So how do you engage with communities in that time is really, really important for this government. But they seem to have the ambition there. And, mission-led government, it sounds great, doesn't it? They've brought in Chris Stark, who was the old head of the Climate Change Committee. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a really exciting time, actually.
Yeah, they've got a decent team, and I think they've got the right perspective of what they want to try and do. Often in this podcast, we've spoken about industry's barriers in terms of policy and moving things forward. But I suppose it'd be quite nice to come again at what's the government's challenges. They're trying to roll out this ambitious plan for zero carbon by 2050. But what are the key challenges that they're going to face to try and do this?
Well, as I said, I think a lot of it is that political will. It's using that political will at this early stage. They've got the mandate to do it. The investment is largely there from the private sector. Actually, we know that the majority of investment that we're going to need to get to net zero, 75 to 90% is going to come from the private sector. So whilst there are some areas where we will need financial support just in terms of getting those markets up and running, for early stage technologies, or you might need, as I said before, early support for vulnerable customers and making sure that they're supported. Actually, there's a lot of non-financial levers that the government can pull, and that is in terms of, how are we doing these projects? So are we making the UK the most investable place in the world? Are we sending out the right signals to investors? Are we making the planning system so that it's easy to get a project through and that they're not being blocked? So I think that will be the challenge, is how do you engage with the public in this critical time? Because actually, if you look at the power sector emissions, they've come down hugely, and a lot of that largely, not completely, but largely has been done with very minimal disruption to anybody. You switch on your light switch, it's the same light switch that you're switching on, but you're getting much cleaner electricity because we've had this massive rollout of renewables. Now, when you look at heat and when you look at transport, which are the two largest emitting sectors in the UK, that will mean changes for people and choices for people. And so it's really important to sort of engage with people and bring them along with us so that it's not something that's imposed on them. They understand not only, have an upfront and honest conversation about what the disruption might be, but also have an upfront and honest conversation about what the benefits might be. Because actually, as we move to a smarter system, that will bring loads of benefits, not only in terms of cost, but in terms of how we use our energy at different times, in terms of, the public sector. Nobody can argue with the fact that if you bring down a school's energy bills or you bring down a hospital's energy bills and they have more money to spend on something else, that's a good thing. If hospitals are warmer and schools are warmer, that's blatantly a good thing for everybody. It will be challenging, and I think it's that people part. I think it's that part which is going to be crucial. How do we bring the public along with us?
That's kind of what I was going to touch on, and I think we'll get onto that in a bit about public buy-in, trust, community development, community engagement. And as a comms person, I am interested in that. But just before we get into that, for anyone that's watching this or listening to this doesn't know what Energy UK is, this would be a good time just to give us an overview of what it is that you do.
Absolutely, yeah. So we are the only trade body in the UK, really, which covers the whole energy sector. So that means that our members are made up of, massive large-scale generators that are building offshore wind farms, massive nuclear plants, right down to the companies that, you or I might buy our energy from. So we call that the retail sector, but really it's those that, you have that direct relationship with. And then pretty much everything in between. So we also do a lot of flexibility assets, EV charging companies, heat pump manufacturers. So we as an organisation have that full representation of the whole sector. And what that means is that we're able to sort of advocate on behalf of industry, but in a really well-informed way, because we have that economy-wide view and the system-wide view. And so that means that we're really well listened to in government. We are the sort of the voice of the energy sector and for the regulator as well. So they may be thinking, how do we deal with this challenge? How do we get past this next step? What's the best way and the most cost-effective way to do something? And what we can do is pull together industry, have that discussion, work out the challenges, and then provide strong recommendations off the back of that. And I think really what kind of sets us apart, our USP really is that economy-wide element, because the whole system is interlinked. And if you're sort of doing something over here on the generation side, quite often it can have an impact on the retail side. So make it, we don't come with a sort of technology-specific angle. We're coming with what is actually the most cost-effective and best way to do this. And one of the great things I think about working at Energy UK is our board has given us a mandate to take these strong positions. They understand that if we're a trade association that's really weakened down by so many different voices that we're not able to really say this is our view on something, that's not useful for anybody. So it's a really great time to be working there, because we can be quite punchy in terms of what we think the government should be doing.
And you have a people-wide view as well, that you spend so much time with people right up and down the value chain, within the organisations, within the infrastructure. You're going to get good perspectives, good opinions, understand good insight as well, what people need, what people want. And often that can be left out actually in the decision-making process. We're very keen to get from A to B, but to do that, it's a network activity and everyone's got to be part of the narrative. It'd be quite nice to know a bit more about the sort of the strategic angle for Energy UK within the next 5 years. How does that align with the energy bill, and how are you working alongside all your stakeholders to deliver on what you do?
Yeah, I think, you raised a really important point. People is at the heart of this. Energy does touch every single person, and regardless, even if you're off the grid, the fact that all of the UK businesses use electricity, and that then affects their competitiveness or the prices that they might, put on things. So it really is something that is right across the whole country and does affect everybody. In terms of our sort of strategic priorities for the next 5 years, we've laid out our we've called it Mission Possible, but our sort of asks of government, if you like, or solutions. We're sort of trying to frame it as a bit more now, really, and that's really how can the government achieve its mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower. I spoke a little bit before about the breadth of our membership, and that makes it very hard to kind of narrow things down, because everybody wants everything and there's so many different areas that you could be talking about. So we've really had to kind of pick and choose and prioritise. But largely speaking, it's around how do we reach 2030 in the most cost effective way possible. how does government work together? What is that institutional governance and how can they work together? How do we get, affordable energy bills and a sustainable retail energy market? These companies that are buying and selling the energy to us, they've been losing money for the last 4 years, so that market has to be sustainable. How can we get closer cooperation with the EU? Again, really, really important for our business competitiveness. And then how can we get the heat and transport sectors to decarbonise as well? So there's lots of detail that sits underneath each of those. But they're largely the sort of 5 priorities that we're working towards. And as I said, we've set out what we think the government needs to do in order to meet what they've said they're going to do, and we'll hold them to account to that.
Amazing. I've heard you speak a few times about the cost of not acting as well, which actually does bring in an interesting conversation. Do you want to just touch on that about, if we don't do the things that we say that we're going to do?
Yeah. So people often talk about the cost of net zero, but it's important in any accounting decision. You think, what is the cost of not doing something as well? And so there was a study that showed that the economic cost globally would be 38 trillion, which is around 10 times the size of the UK's economy now, if we don't meet net zero. But that's, it's quite a big lofty number. I don't even know what that would look like or, what else that relates to. But, as I said before, I think it's important to think around, these secondary benefits as well that you get from it. Like I said, in the public sector, there was a survey recently that showed that every £1 that you invest in improving home insulation and home heating actually saves the NHS 42p. That's a great deal. Let's do more of that stuff. So I think it's really important to think about what the opportunity cost is of not doing any of this stuff. Existentially, climate change should be enough of a reason to be cracking on with all of this. But when you look at all the other benefits that reaching net zero brings, it grows the economy, it creates jobs up and down the country, and it improves our energy security as well. So actually all of those things are just as important as reducing our carbon emissions, I think, when we're talking to people and we're thinking about those different audiences that we're talking to, because different people will have different points of view that they're coming from.
Mm-hmm. I love the coupling between energy to decarbonisation to health and well-being to environmentalism. I just think it allows people to match what their ethics and values are in a way that's more transparent to them. And I like the fact that you're coupling things with other areas. I'd kind of like to have a look at we've talked about the cost of not acting, but actually we've talked a little bit about bringing everyone into the narrative here, bringing more people, making it more inclusive. Actually, that might lead on quite now to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion within this transition, and kind of your views and opinions on that.
This is something I feel really strongly about, and we're not doing well enough, I have to say, as an industry. We have come a long way. Well, for starters, we serve everybody, right? We serve communities. So it's really important that the people that are making those decisions, whether it be around bills, whether it be around, infrastructure and how it's built, actually represent a diverse section of society. We should mirror that so that we're making sure that we're taking those points of view into account. But the second part of it really is, we're going to need hundreds and thousands of new workers to join our industry. We'd be mad not to want the biggest pool of talent possible, but to do that, we need to make sure that we're opening it up to more diverse pools of candidates. And that means, making sure that the senior leaders that are visible, represent lots of different areas of diversity. And it's not just gender and it's not just ethnicity. It goes much further than that. It's disability, it's neurodiversity, it's where you grew up, making sure that people can see, right, I'm from this background, I can see myself in a role like that. So we have a load more to do in the energy industry, and we've done fairly well on gender, but still 20% of the top energy companies in the UK don't have a female on their board. And that is mad. Don't have one, and we can do better than that. I know we can. And that's just gender, and when you think about all of the other forms of diversity, it's really important. I often give the example, a lot of wind turbines don't have toilets on them, how it's, that does kind of affect you if you're a woman, and, it's not as easy to, just go off the side, it's how it, so I think there's something around making the physical environment welcoming for people from all different backgrounds, and then there's something around how do we position the industry so it's as attractive as possible to as many different people as possible, and that will bring us loads of benefits. There's been loads of studies that say actually companies that have more diverse senior leadership teams perform better, from an economic perspective and from a business case perspective. So there's every reason to do it. We just need to, again, just move a bit faster because progress is really, really slow.
We need to be faster. In terms of within the energy sector, we're making decisions about people's lives. We're making decisions about how people should live their lives in terms of how they move around, they travel, how they hit their homes. So there is an element of lived experience in there, and that's why we need diversity in terms of the amount of people that are making these decisions and getting input and insight from people. We often talk about within the green economy, green jobs, and often these jobs are around engineering, the science, the research jobs. But actually, there is actually a whole wide range of different areas that people can get into the energy sector. I'd like to kind of explore that. We were speaking about this a bit earlier, but what kind of areas of work can people think about in terms of moving into this exciting, growing sector?
I mean, anything you think about really will have a role to play. I mean, the reason I've said that is, I do communications. You can come from any sort of different background to do communications and get in. So I think, yes, we will need a lot of technical roles in science, technology, engineering and maths, wind turbine technicians, smart meter apprentices, heat pump installers, particularly around welding, HVDC electricians. We'll need all of those roles. But we'll also need planners, people with geographical backgrounds that could do the environmental consenting for projects, lawyers, people that are thinking about financing, how do you finance these projects as well, and good comms people to get the word out. So whether you're from a STEM background or not, I think there are plenty of jobs, within the energy industry. And actually, if you look at some of the, specifically coastal areas where we've seen offshore wind, completely revitalise towns, and it's, they've gone from declining industries like fishing or, in Scotland, like oil and gas. And actually, these companies have come in investing billions and billions of pounds in the local area and creating jobs. And those jobs aren't just the people that are literally on the wind turbine. It's, it's the caterers. We had a great case study when I was working for an offshore wind developer about a small catering company that had doubled in size thanks to the work that they'd got from this wind farm. So actually there are so many different benefits on the local side in terms of jobs, I think.
Yeah, and we mentioned other areas like chefs or people that work in other types of utilities, etc. that can, and you mentioned, was it a vessel?
Yeah. So offshore wind farms now are so big that they're 120, 130 kilometres offshore. So whereas before, wind turbine technicians would go back and forth, each shift and, come back onto the shore every night. Now they sort of stay offshore 2 weeks at a time, a bit like oil and gas model. And then they'll come back again and they stay on these huge vessels. They're called, boats, normal word, plain English. So they're called service operation vessels, SOVs, and they're a bit like a cruise liner, and it's got a gym and it's got a cinema, and they'll have, chefs on board there, and the food is lovely, because they need to keep the teams really well, what's the word? Well fed, I guess. Well fed, yeah. Lots of energy for them, because it's hard shifts. But again, that's just some of the different ways of working because of different technology innovations and things like that. And, specifically, again, when you look offshore, the way that they work now, so they used to, when they were going onto a turbine, a technician, you used to sort of push the boat onto the bottom of a turbine, which is known as the transition piece. You'd push on, you'd have to get off, you'd have to climb up a ladder with all your climbing gear on and get onto kind of the bottom of the turbine. And then luckily they do have lifts once you get to that point, so you have a lift up to the top. But that means that you've already done quite a high climb before you've even started your shift, with a lot of gear on and getting from the boat onto the ladder. You need to make sure that's done in a safe way. Whereas now what they have from these vessels, these service operation vessels, is a motion compensated gangway. So just basically you can walk from the vessel onto the turbine. Sounds like a tiny thing, but for somebody that's doing that day in, day out, it makes a real difference to their job. And again, that can have an impact on the diversity side of things as well. Does that encourage more women to join actually if it's not such a physical start to the, to the job and things like that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of innovation happening.
Yeah, we've talked about the different roles and very people-focused in terms of this transition, in terms of the different jobs, in terms of the different challenges that come with these different areas of work. And I suppose that brings it back to the trade association. How are you, what are the main roles and responsibilities that you're supporting people and industry in the transition moving forward?
So we support all of our members from from a policy perspective, essentially. So that's kind of our main function, is are we advocating for the right policies for, the businesses that we represent, which invest millions and millions of pounds into the UK. On the wider sort of diversity side of things, we do see that we have a role to try and encourage businesses to improve their EDI. A lot of them will have their own functions and their own programs that they're running, but we actually also run a cross-industry initiative called TIDE, where we work with the regulator, we work with the Energy Networks Association, so they represent the network side of the energy system, and we work with the Energy Institute as well. And that was really, how can we bring together expertise from pockets of the sector that have done really good work. So the offshore wind sector's done a lot in that area. The nuclear sector has just launched Destination Nuclear, all about, the jobs and skills there. So how can we just kind of pull that together into one body that can just help us all, really? That was the purpose of it. How can we make it as easy as possible for those companies to improve their own EDI and their own workforce? And one area where I think TIDE has actually provided a lot of value is in the data collection. So, we didn't have any industry-wide data of what the industry looks like, which you kind of need to see to know where you need to improve. So TIDE has done 2 data initiatives. One is called a health index, which is looking at what the companies are doing themselves to improve their own EDI. And then we've also worked with, or we're kind of pointing all the organisations to an organisation called Energy and Utility Skills, who works with a group called the Equal Group, and they do measurement of really what the workforce looks like as well. So I think with those 2 tools, we're trying to build up a bigger picture. But we also have a role in the sort of the early careers. How are we engaging with people from younger ages, trying to inspire them to work into the energy industry? But it's not just about new people either. It's about how can we support people that are either retraining or reskilling, coming back into work, maybe transferring from a different industry. Maybe they've been working in oil and gas for years, and they're thinking about what their future might look like. So it's not just about the young kids. There is a lot we can do with young people, and I can talk you through some of the initiatives that we do there. But it is about everybody, really. It is about capturing everybody.
Amazing. So you mentioned a few different sort of projects and organisations. There's Energy Utility Skills and TIDE. So we can put all the information of those into the show notes. So we'll make sure that that's accessible. And anything else that we've mentioned in there, we can also, in terms of jobs, roles, and obviously Energy UK, the different projects, we can put it in the show notes. But there's so much to do, and there's so many challenges. I think we kind of need a superhero. I don't know if you know anyone that we could call upon, do you?
I don't know. Maybe if I just click my fingers, then one might appear. Maybe a superhero like this.
Hello.
Hello.
Who are you?
I am Killah Jules. I was created to engage the public in a bit more of a fun and engaging and creative way, really, about energy.
And we met at the Great Exhibition Road Festival in June. Yeah. I was working on our stall making wind turbines, and I just couldn't believe the amount of engagement you were getting when people were coming over, and they were asking you questions, and you had facts. So tell me how. I want to know the point where you came up with the idea for this.
Well, actually, it started a while back. So my name is Juliette. My friends call me Jules, and in lockdown. So I'm a bit musical as well in my spare time. So in lockdown, it actually started where I was doing musical cover songs. So I'd take, Destiny's Child or The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and change all the lyrics, make a little video about it. Because there's so many positive stories happening in energy. And I think we don't talk about them enough, and we don't get them out in a cool way. So that's how it started. Then I started dressing up as a wind turbine and largely going to festivals, and then I also started making, maybe can't see them, but wind turbine jewellery. So I've got earrings and necklaces and cufflinks, and these are kind of designed as conversation starters, and it genuinely does work. You'll be out there and someone will be like, is that a wind turbine? And then you can tell them a fact. But the Exhibition Road Festival was kind of the first time I'd really trialled it with kids. And it was brilliant. They were sort of coming up, they're like, does it spin? Should we see if we can make it spin? Go on. Woo! And they're like, wow, that's amazing, and then you hit the parents with the stat. This is great. So my favourite stat, which I think is really relatable for people, is that one spin of an offshore wind turbine, just one spin, can power a UK home for over 2 days, right? And that just really resonates with people. And so you kind of engage with the kids a bit, and then you're like, hey, parents, did you know this? And then you test them at the end, like one spin, how many days? And yeah, I've had really, really great engagement. So whether that be festivals or, you know, children, things like that. I'm hoping to go into schools a little bit more now and, you know, really kind of get the word out.
And I like that you said that stat as well when I was there. And now when I see a whole farm of like wind turbines and watching them all turn, you can just get a feel of how much energy they're producing.
Yeah.
And they're only getting bigger. They're only producing more energy. So
exactly. I must caveat that stat. It's an offshore wind turbine and it's one spin at full capacity. Because there's always a million people like, no, that's not true. It is true. One spin, 2 days, over 2 days.
So Killah Jules is incorporating not only this amazing outfit and loads of interesting facts and stats and going out and engaging people, making jewellery. Tell me a bit about the music, because I'm really interested in that, and tell me about some of the songs.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's been really fun. So one of them, I guess I used to work in offshore wind, so a bit about my career. I guess I started off as an engineer. Worked in a large energy company's graduate scheme for a while, so moved around different departments and things like that, and then spent the majority of my career in offshore wind before I joined Energy UK, looking at the whole system. So a lot of the songs are largely offshore wind based, but and the other really annoying thing is a lot of them are out of date now because the industry is moving so fast. So, you know, I did one on, it was called 40 Gigs. It was Beyonce's Naughty Girl. I'm not going to try and sing it now. But really that was about when the UK upped its target from 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 to 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. To put that in perspective, we've got about 15 gigawatts now, so a hell of a way to go. Now the target's been raised even further to 55 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So that song, bam, out of date. You know, there was lots about how the UK led the world in offshore wind. So for a long time, we actually had way more capacity installed than any other country. China's overtaken us now, but all the early songs are about, you know, how much we're a global leader. I did one on... So the review of the electricity market arrangements, right, sounds really boring. It's actually really exciting. It's kind of the biggest shake-up in electricity market that we've seen in decades, you know, in a generation. But, you know, as I said, it sounds a bit boring like that. But we changed the lyrics, so instead of Rima, which is how it's known, did Craig David's Rewind, so it's time to review the market. So it's just, how can you make it fun? I did Beastie Boys Interconnector the other day, so interconnector. I mean, I'm sure you'll put a link on, but yeah, it's good fun actually doing it. But I mean, it sounds like I'm being really silly, and you know, I manage a big team. I've got a serious job on my day job, and you know, I don't want them to think I'm just frolicking around in fields dressed as a wind turbine. You know, it does have a purpose, because actually, you know, it's Glastonbury recently, managed to get on Sky News and was able to tell the nation, you know, that actually wind energy overtook gas for the first time, you know, last year, which is incredible, or that stat about one spin. So it does serve a purpose. And I think, you know, we've spoken about the skills challenge and how much we need to engage younger people. And I remember when I was a kid, if there was something like this that came into my school, you know, I would really remember it. So I think we need to make it exciting. I think it's incumbent on all of us, really.
I love the stats, and I love the fact I'm really into like schematical visual ideas, infographics, you know, one spin, 2 days of a home. I can almost see that animated, and I think a lot of people, especially young people, that's how they learn. And I'm sure loads of those young people are now going to their schools, telling their teachers, their teachers are telling the next, and it is about passing these messages on. I'm really into communications. I think we've got a roadmap here in the UK for zero carbon. We've got great people doing great work. Policy should now be moving in the right direction a bit faster, but it's still a comms challenge. We still need to get everyone on the bus. So I think people, and like Killah Jules is such a great idea. And this kind of goes back to other people that are thinking about moving into energy, moving into sustainability. Performers, artists, musicians, it opens it up. We should all be talking about this, but we should try to do it in a positive way. It's not all doom and gloom. We found out the conversations that I'm having just on this podcast, there is loads of great things for us to shout about. So as well, I'm going to start thinking about coming to a sort of natural conclusion on this, but let's talk about young people. I know that you'd like to mention about the young energy professionals, if you wanted to sort of say something about that.
So we, Energy UK runs this network called the Young Energy Professionals Forum. It's free to join for anybody with up to 10 years experience working in energy, but it's also for students as well. And you get so many amazing networking opportunities from that. So they do site visits. They've taken, groups of people up to National Grid's control room, offshore in a wind farm. You go out on a boat with them. They do sort of networking, as I said, panel events. They have an awards thing every year. So I got a lot when I was young enough. Or it's not really about age, it's about how long you've been working in energy. But I was part of it and I got so much out of it. And actually, they're running a survey at the minute to try and get as many views from young people as they can. And I think that's going to be really important. What are young people's views on the future of the energy sector? Because these guys will be the leaders of tomorrow. And I completely agree with you on the comms side of things. I think, the last few years have been difficult, especially, for anybody working in the energy sector and specifically in comms. It has been a challenge and it's been quite difficult to weave in that optimistic messaging when, you're dealing with a crisis that's affecting, pretty much the whole country. So it's hard to sort of get that balance of optimism and, and making sure that we're also, speaking in a credible way that is people first and and is really considering the struggles that people have gone through. But I do feel that now, because energy is now sort of at the height of the agenda of media, it's been in the news so much. My friends have never been more interested in what I do, and now that we're a bit out of the crisis zone, actually we can really start to push these positive messages, because I think optimism works really well. I think plain English works really well. I think talking about energy abundance works really well. And like you say, data-driven, image-led comms or analogies or even, a meme can actually really easily get across what can be quite a complex topic in energy. Actually, you can just explain it really well with a really good analogy. So, I think from a comms perspective, I couldn't imagine working in another sector.
Amazing. Well, on that note, I think we'll come to a close on that. That's amazing. So in terms of if anyone's listening or watching this and they want to know more about Energy UK, where should we send them?
You can send them to our website, which we recently did a couple of years ago. So so Energy, if you just Google Energy UK, then I think it comes up. And then you'll be able to get to the Young Energy Professionals Forum from there as well. I think that's, really, really worth checking it out. But there's loads and loads of interesting podcasts, on the internet as well that you can look at, and videos and stuff like that. So I would say check out the Energy UK website, and we'll put in some links to some of the documents that we've done recently about how we're going to work with the new government and the exciting changes that are going to happen within our sector. Amazing. And for Killah Jules, where should we send people? Thank you so much. Killah Jules is killahjules.com. So KILLAHJULES.com. Okay, so then you can be like, Killah Jules. Well, we'll put that all in the show notes and all the comments. But Juliette and Jules, thank you so much for today. It's been amazing to talk to you, and I can't wait to do it all again. Thank you for having me. Cheers. Thank you for tuning in to the Energy Futures podcast. Here at Energy Futures Lab, we are dedicated to addressing global energy challenges through pioneering research, innovation, and advocacy. To learn more about us and the exciting projects we are working on, visit our website and follow us on social media. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest content.